So that was how they got the agents to infiltrate these groups. However, in the UK, what we've seen worryingly in the last few years is a sort of explosion in private security firms as well. In the US, notoriously, we have Blackwater, which has gone into Iraq and murdered people with legal impunity. But in the UK, we have other companies like Kroll or Diligence, which in fact was set up by one of my ex-colleagues and is doing very well. And they get paid by big corporations primarily to go and spy on activist groups. So, you know, an arms company is worried about some protesters, they buy the services of these companies, or environmental camps and things like that. So there's a sort of the official spies who have very little oversight anyway from the government. Then you have the unofficial spies, many of whom are former ex-spooks anyway, doing all this stuff completely outside the law.
What would be, to your knowledge, the split now between the official spies who are paid by the government and these contract spies? I mean, I've read figures in the U.S. that Blackwater is huge. It's the largest private army in the world. But what's the situation, to your knowledge, in the UK?
From what I've seen, very similar. MI5 in my day had about 2,000 full-time staff. And out of that, there would probably be about 400 or 500 intelligence officers, and the rest were support staff. Now they have virtually doubled that number, but that's still quite a small organisation. And then, of course, you have the agents around that organisation who are infiltrating the groups. In terms of the commercial companies, they are massive. I mean, we're talking many, many large companies. And there have been a series of scandals over the last few years revealed in the UK press of people who have been caught out spying on these activist groups. So, you know, who can tell what's happening with meetings like this as well? Certainly in the UK, there may well be infiltration from MI5 agents. I would say there almost certainly would be infiltration from the police, because there's a sort of second tier of intelligence work in the UK where we have the secret police doing this sort of thing. And possibly as well, of course, these commercial spies. And they could actually all be running around treading on each other's toes as well, because
they
quite
normally
often,
don't know each other,
exactly,
do they?
Exactly. So they can cause each other problems as well.
Yeah. Now, you're in the spy agency now, and you and a partner, David Shaler, a fellow MI5 employee, and you people fell in love and you became partners in that way. But then you both became disillusioned. And can you tell us, skip forward to when you did and why you did become disillusioned and became whistleblowers?
Yeah. David Shaler and I met in our first section, which was the political subversion section, which we helped to shut down, actually. And we were both in MI5 for about 6 years. And during that time, in 3 different postings each, we just saw incrementally things getting worse and worse in terms of bombings that could and should have been prevented, in terms of illegal phone taps and operations, and crucially in terms of 2 false flag terrorist attacks. The first of which was in London in 1994, when the Israeli embassy was car-bombed in a very smart part of London. And this was blamed on 2 innocent Palestinians who were arrested, charged and convicted of conspiracy to cause this attack. And they were both sentenced to 20 years each for this attack. And it turned out in the assessment of MI5, the senior officer in charge of the investigation, who'd seen all the evidence and all the intelligence, his assessment was that Mossad had bombed their own embassy in a controlled explosion. One, to gain increased security around Jewish interests in London, but primarily to shatter a Palestinian political network, which was growing very fast in London, and of which these 2 were members. So that was the first case, and that really made us sit up and think about what we got ourselves into. But the primary case was an assassination attempt against Colonel Gaddafi of Libya, and this happened in 1996. And in this case, it was an Islamic extremist terrorist group which was paid by MI6, which is the external intelligence agency, it's a sort of James Bond wing of British intelligence. And they paid money to this group to try and assassinate Gaddafi. And they'd done it illegally under UK law because they hadn't gained the permission of their political masters. They can actually get the license to kill if they get prior written permission for illegal acts abroad. And the attack obviously went wrong. Gaddafi is still very much alive, but innocent people died. So this was the thing, this was the case that made David Shaler and I quit. We couldn't think of anything more heinous than the British state, the British intelligence agencies, actually funding a group with al-Qaeda connections to try and assassinate someone illegally and kill innocent people. So we decided to leave. We hadn't signed up to work for the British intelligence community in order to get involved in organisations that committed terrorism and killed innocent people. So we left. And in 1997, we ended up going public about our concerns about these crimes. And in fact, we ended up going to the newspapers, because under UK law, there's a piece of legislation called the Official Secrets Act, which makes it a crime to report a crime if you are an intelligence officer. So even though we were saying the spies have committed murder, we were the criminals by even saying that, and there was no investigation into MI6's murder attempt against Colonel Gaddafi. So we went to the press in order to, one, try and get enough attention to force an inquiry into this assassination attempt, but two, also for protection for ourselves. And we ended up blowing the whistle and having to go on the run around Europe.
And I know that's a long and harrowing story, too. But if we could nevertheless jump ahead a bit, you recall that I had the pleasure of meeting you and David in London in May of '05, and specifically, David and I sat across the aisle from each other on a bus trip to Manchester, and to say the least, David seemed to be an eminently sane and wonderful person. And yet, a lot of people here might not know, but more recently, David has been quoted, and I don't know what the facts are, as saying that he believes he's Jesus Christ, this kind of thing. Can you tell the true and inside story of how things came to be this way and what really happened?
Well, it's a difficult story, I suppose. I mean, David was the primary whistleblower, and when you're a whistleblower in the UK, part of society sort of idolizes you because you've spoken out, and part of the society calls you a traitor. They say, how dare you speak out? So there's this sort of vilification and this idolization, which is quite a difficult mix, I think, for any human being to try and compute. And I think the pressure just got to him. I mean, over the years, he had gone to prison. He'd had to live in exile in France for 3 years as well. And he'd suffered a very unfair trial where he wasn't allowed to say why he'd done what he'd done. So I think all that pressure built up. There was also a sort of isolation as well from mainstream society, and a constant struggle to survive financially. So there were all sorts of factors going on. We were quite isolated for quite a long time. And I suppose as well, he'd gone through all this trauma, and in 2006 he met a natural healer who suggested, well, you know, to help you through some of this trauma, there are these sort of Amazonian vine plants that can help you. Many people take this. It helps you go through your past life and deal with whatever's happened to you. And he had some treatment called ayahuasca, I think it's called, which is something that the tribes in the Amazon take. And that seemed to exacerbate all these different things that had hit him. It didn't help, it rather made it worse. In fact, this was the stuff that David Icke, I don't know how many of you are familiar with David Icke and his work, but he's another guy who's come out and talked about being the Messiah at one point and all the rest of it. He took this and also had the same Messiah moment. So in 2007, David decided to give some interviews to the media in the UK and say, you know, I'm the Messiah, I'm the reincarnation of the Christ consciousness and things. I have to say, looking back, though, I should have really spotted the signs a bit earlier. We separated as a couple in 2006, and I'm sure that probably didn't help his mindset either. But he was getting more and more intractable. I mean, he had got very involved with questioning the official account of 9/11 through 2005, 2006. And because of his profile in the UK, had actually done a lot of good, building the movement, the 9/11 movement in the UK, and had got some media interviews. But then he started focusing on speculative fringe theories about what might have happened on 9/11, rather than focusing on the campaigning issue. And he was becoming more and more intractable and more difficult to work with, and jeopardizing the work of many other people who are focusing on these sort of issues in the UK. So it just sort of spun out of control, really. And it's just very sad. I mean, many people say, well, did he do it deliberately to try and embarrass a political campaign or whatever? I think it's just a personal tragedy for a man who